McDonald. We are so glad that you're with us tonight. Well, Michigan voters have spoken, and what they said took a lot of pundits and pollsters by surprise. After all the votes were counted in the state's presidential primary, Bernie Sanders edged out Hillary Clinton in the Democratic race, and voters gave Republican Donald Trump a thumbs up. So coming up tonight, we'll take a closer look at the results in Michigan's primary, what led to the Democratic upset, and what's ahead for the candidates. Also tonight, more changes at the top of Detroit Public Schools. We will talk about the new people leading the district and their plans to fix the school system. Plus, a look at the issues that led to the 1967 civil unrest in Detroit. Have conditions improved today? It's all coming up on MiWeek. But we do begin with the results of Tuesday's primary. The election clearly generated a lot of interest. Voter turnout in the state set a record. More than 2.5 million people cast ballots. It's almost 35% turnout, the most since the start of the modern primary back in 1972. There's a little primary history for you. Some communities even ran out of ballots. And as expected, Donald Trump took the Republican race, 37% of the votes. Ted Cruz, John Kasich were neck and neck with 25 and 24% respectively. But it was the Democratic race that delivered the biggest surprise. Bernie Sanders took 50% of the votes, and the clear favorite, Hillary Clinton, had 48%. Now, showing the polls that they're really not all they're cracked up to be. So we're going to start there with our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News. Hi, Nolan.
Hey,
Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Surprise! The Michigan primary surprise wasn't the one that everyone predicted. It was indeed Bernie Sanders. I'm going to start with you because you were like, yeah, Hillary Clinton's got this.
Yeah, I know, right? I kept saying, yeah, it seems like it'll be closer than the polls suggested, but that she would pull it out. She didn't. And there are a number of different reasons, I think, that have sort of come to light. One is the way she campaigned versus the way he campaigned. He went to lots of places and got people worked up.
Yeah, but she spent 4 days in a row in the state, which is a significant amount of time, though.
She skipped a lot of the places that he went. For instance, she made no appearances in the entire 12th congressional district of Michigan. Pretty important place for Democrats. Pretty important place to get people excited about her. She didn't go there. I mean, I think there's also, you know, the way that he connected with voters over their economic frustration was pretty masterful, especially in the closing weeks of the election. I thought that his performance at the debate in Flint would have hurt him more with African Americans. I thought it would have hurt him a little more with people who are concerned about the economy here because of the auto thing, and there's some confusion over what he really did there. But on stage that night, he looked pretty bad, but apparently that didn't have the effect that I thought it would.
What was the significant plus for Bernie Sanders that you think put him over the edge, Nolan?
Well, this is not an issues election this year. I think by now we should realize that voters aren't paying all that much attention to position by position of these candidates. These are personality elections. People are looking for something new, fresh, different, not of Washington, and mostly they're looking for someone genuine. They are tired of the same old political double talk and what have you. And if you say anything about Bernie Sanders, he certainly is who he is. He's genuine. He doesn't change his positions. She stood up there in that debate the other night in Flint and changed her position, and last night again changed her position on that she's held all her lives, position she's held all her lives. She's chasing him. She's allowing him to dictate the campaign, and she just doesn't look comfortable. She doesn't look real. And, you know, people are excited about folks, you know, who look real, who they can believe in.
And you know, part of the problem with that, though, is that it sort of errs on the side of oversimplicity, right?
I agree.
The things that Bernie are saying, a lot of them are really true, and they are resonant with people who are having a hard time. But the things he's saying he wants to do about them are either not going to help the situation, they might make it worse, or they're completely
unattainable.
Right.
But couldn't you say that about anybody in this election right now?
This year,
I don't think so. I don't think Hillary Clinton's talking about anything that's unachievable.
Except Clinton is going after his policies too much. He is in her head too much. He is dictating her campaign. Yeah. She's a person who's been reasonable on trade. The other night, she was completely unreasonable on trade. She's been reasonable on energy policy. She threw that out. Last night on immigration, on that debate, it's, you know, let everybody in. We deport nobody. I mean, she's letting Bernie Sanders dictate this race. But again, I go back to the reality that we're seeing on both sides of the aisle. This isn't an issues election. I've said before, I keep running into people who say, gosh, I can't decide between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And that was...
Which is a very bizarre statement.
And it's a very odd choice. But you hear it a lot, which tells me it's not about what the candidates are saying, it's how they're saying and whether people believe they're genuine. And that's a real issue for her. Yeah. And you saw that Tuesday night. But let's remember, it's Michigan. Michigan's a state that went for George Wallace, for Jesse Jackson, for Pat Robertson on the Republican side, McCain instead of Bush. They do weird things here in primary.
They do weird things. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about projecting those weird things or even predicting those weird things, because a lot of the polls said, oh my gosh, Hillary's up 17 points, she's up 25 points. Where did they get it so wrong, Stephen?
Well, I mean, I think everybody knew before Tuesday that the polls that had it at double digits and larger were probably wrong. It all comes down to weighting and the way you weight turnout on election day demographically, both in terms of age and race and gender. The pollsters try their best to come up with what they think will look like the group of people who turn out on election day, and they make predictions on the basis of that. I think they were pretty wrong about the size of the turnout and what the turnout would look like on election day, and so their polls were wrong.
You got a lot of young voters too.
And that's it. These millennials are not pollable because
these millennials.
They aren't pollable. I mean, because
they are pollable.
They don't have landline, but they didn't here.
Hey, I'm not a millennial, and I'm not answering my landline much anymore.
I don't have one,
and
but
so
most
it's
people
harder
don't.
and
Thanks
harder.
for that, by the way, Nolan. I heard that.
It's harder and harder to poll them. But if you look on the Republican side, I mean, the polls were fairly accurate. And I was getting calls on Tuesday during the day saying, well, or Monday, I mean, the last polls are showing Kasich closing. And as it turned out, Kasich won the election day vote in Michigan, lost the absentee vote. So on the Republican side, older voters perhaps, they did a little better job. Those polls were fairly accurate. Democratic side, you had all these young people surging in whose pollsters don't reach.
Well, you also had on the Republican side, and this is anecdotal, and I don't mean to make it more than that, but I did hear it a lot. I think you had a lot of Democrats who thought it was sewn up for Hillary Clinton because of the polls. She wasn't in any danger. And they went into the booth and they voted in the Republican primary. I know 4 people who voted for Kasich.
It was a record.
Who are Democrats.
Didn't happen.
I don't know how widespread that is, but I've heard a lot about it.
You look at the turnout, it was a record Democratic turnout, almost equal to the Republican turnout.
Because independents voted in the Democratic primary.
Democrats I think they split. I think you saw a lot of Democrats or a lot of independents in the Republican Party. Democrats stayed home in that race. There wasn't a whole lot of crossover on either side. They stayed home, and it's really amazing the amount of voters both Trump and Sanders brought out. This was a record turnout, as you mentioned in the opening.
Yeah, let's get to the Trump factor, because we can't have a political conversation without it. Now he is just continuing to roll, and everything that we talked about last week in terms of the Republican establishment trying to stop him, Nolan, or throwing money at super PACs to try to stop him doesn't seem to be working now. When does the Republican establishment step back and say, these are people voting for him in each state, this is what the people want?
I don't think they're ready to do that now. I don't think some of them may never be ready to do that. But this anti-Trump spending just started. That's kicked in just before the Michigan primary.
It did.
I think you did.
So is there any time for it to make any sort of difference right now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're spending $21 million in Florida, and Florida votes Tuesday. But I think you saw a little of the impact on Tuesday. Trump was below 40%. You had Kasich picking up a lot more votes than he had been, and a lot of that anti-Trump money was spent on him. They're spending in Ohio, they're spending in Illinois, they're spending in Florida. I don't know if it's going to work, but I don't think it's going to let up until March 15th, next Tuesday, when they see what the impacts are.
Let me just throw out the number of $21 million being spent over a weekend to stop somebody in their own same party. And again, I have so many things that I could actually spend some of that money on, but I'm just going to make that point and then go to you.
There's just a lot of, there's a lot of strange things that are going on in this campaign, and they cause strange reactions. This is one of them. I continue to think that the problem here is the tension between keeping 3 people in the race and trying to beat him strategically in individual states, or trying to get 2 people out of the race in order for one person to start winning the primaries. Because if you add up the number of votes that the other 3 are getting at this point, it's actually more than Trump.
In some states, but not all.
It's not everywhere. In Mississippi, it wasn't, right. But we don't have a lot of those sort of Cotton Belt states left to vote. Places like New York, places like California, the other West Coast states, it probably would be better if you had one alternative to him than 3. If your goal is to deny him the nomination.
The problem for Republicans is the most likely opportunity or single candidate to face him, the one who's won at least some state, is Ted Cruz. And for a lot of people in the party, he's as unpalatable as Trump. And so there's been some hope that either Kasich or Rubio would rise. Kasich did rise in Michigan. Whether he can sustain or not, I don't know, but Rubio looks almost done. I mean, he needs to win Florida or get out.
Well, the race is going to look very different after Florida next week, you think?
I think so, and I think if Trump's not stopped after March 15th, the Republicans then sort of switch into their go to the convention strategy, and you hear a lot of people talking about that now.
Drinking Trump wine and eating Trump steaks. All right.